History laid the foundation
that informs our conversation. Welcome to the classroom.
From the church to the streets, and even in the suites, and all around the world. I'm gonna keep it real in the classroom.
Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom.
Good afternoon and welcome back to another edition of Fannie Lou's Classroom. As always, we're super excited to be live on this Thursday as you take your lunch hour to have a different kind of food on today. So we're super excited about our conversation. Last week was amazing, and so we're going to continue that conversation and continue to build on what we might have to think about in the times that we currently find ourselves in. And so we're turning our attention to the state of Texas today as we are in our 89th Texas legislative session. Here in Texas, we meet on the odd years to handle all of this big state's business within a short period of time. And I have two guests today that I'm excited to have so we can talk a little bit about what we can expect in this session, but also what we might be able to do if we can work collectively as people of faith across the state of Texas. So first, you know, I messed up last week and I didn't do this because we jumped right into the conversation with my brother, Reverend Reggie. Totally forgot to thank the folks that make this run and make us look good on YouTube. First is Brooke, our engineer, who handles all things related to the podcast to make sure everything is on point. And then, of course, Cheryl Prelo, who always helps out making sure our guests are ready to go. We have research done. She just manages all the behind the scenes. As you all know, again, Shanika has moved on up a little. I shouldn't say a little higher. That's Moorhead Jackson. That means she went on up to the upper room. We're not saying that, but she's moved on. Oh, the Jeffersons, I got it. She moved on up to the east side. She got a piece of the pie. So we're still excited for her and her endeavors and where she currently is. And so, so excited on today. So let me introduce our guest, and then we're going to just jump right into the conversation. So first we have B. Moorhead. B. Moorhead has been the executive director of Texas Impact and its sister organization, the Texas Impact Foundation, since 2000. Under B's leadership, Texas Impact and Texas Impact Foundation are among the most respected interfaith networks in the country. Texas Impact regularly mobilizes tens of thousands of Texans from across the spectrum of faith traditions to advocate for policies that support vulnerable people, local communities, and a livable planet. B's policies expertise include a wide range of issues, including health and human services, climate, migration, public budgets, and civic engagement. She has served on numerous state agency working groups and task forces on topics ranging from nursing homes to hurricane response. She is a credentialed observer to the United Nations climate policy negotiation process. In that capacity, she has attended the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change's annual conference of the parties every year since 2015. She is a registered lobbyist with the state of Texas. Her government experience includes 8 years as a senior fiscal policy analyst for the Texas Comptroller of Public Accountants. Let's welcome B to the classroom.
Thanks for having me.
And then we have the Reverend Dr. Angela Ravin-Anderson, who is an ordained minister deeply dedicated to nurturing a genuine embodiment of God's love among God's people. Her calling revolves around guiding believers toward transformation and unity, fostering communities of healing and reconciliation through her preaching and instructional ministry. Dr. Ravin-Anderson established the Streams in Wasteland Leadership Institute, an empowering platform that tailors training for women as Christian leaders, honoring their individuality, passions, and spiritual gifts to reach marginalized groups. Her role as a senior adjunct professor at Abilene Christian University involves teaching various courses in the College of Biblical Studies, specializing in Christian leadership, Old and New Testament studies, and spiritual formation. Currently at Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church, she spearheads the social justice ministry focused on dismantling and disrupting Systemic Injustices Affecting the Local Houston Community. Dr. Ravin-Anderson also serves as the second vice president of political action for the Houston Metropolitan Baptist Ministers Conference. Let's welcome Dr. Ravin-Anderson to the classroom. So I just read briefly part of their bios. You can definitely go into the description on this podcast, on this session, on this episode, and click more, and you'll see their full bios. Because as you can see, just from that brief bio description, they are two awesome women, and we love awesome women because women lead and women are powerful and we get things done. So super excited to just talk. I've worked with them both on different occasions, so I thought it'd be good for us to come together collectively, and we'll talk about some work we're doing together that you can mark your, not just mark your calendars, you can begin to register to participate in a faith days at the Capitol that we will have. It's powered by our three organizations, our two respective churches, and Texas Impact, and we'll talk more about that toward the end of the podcast. We want you to join us. So I thought today would be a good time. We're in session, and for us to talk about, from our perspectives, various perspectives, what we can expect this session, what we need to give our attention to, and what's already happening in Austin. And so where I want to start, because last week, if you were here last week, go back and watch last week's episode. We started the conversation talking about what's happening at the national level, right? We're talking about what happened on January the 20th to now, right? So last week we talked about all the onslaught of executive orders, right, which we say are designed to kind of put us in a frenzy, get us afraid, for us to be fearful, to kind of figure out what's going on, throwing all this information at us at one time. We talked about take your time, sit back, breathe, level yourself, put your feet on the ground. Don't let this get you to the point where you just, where we retreat. Right, and where we figured there's nothing we can do, that we have no power to really do something about what's happening. In addition to the fact that we know a lot of the executive orders were against the law, he doesn't have the power to do some of the stuff that he is putting out, right? So part of it is, we want to make sure that we're keeping our eye on the national level, but not being consumed, and that we're connecting locally with organizations who are doing the work, so you can see there's still a way. And we had a Sankofa moment last week where we talked about the ways, particularly Black Americans, responded in times of crises like this, where there was an all-out assault on people's humanity. And that's really what we're looking at and what's happening. And I want to talk about some real issues that happened this week with personal friends of mine, as it relates to the federal government and loss of job and the threat of resigning and taking a package, as opposed to getting their pensions and having worked for that government agency for more than 25 years. And so there are real impacts, right, when it comes to policy and law. So I wanted to have the conversation today around Texas, because the same thing happens at our state level. I would say what we see happening in D.C. is being replicated on the state level in Texas. And so I thought B and Angela would be great guests on today to talk about that from their respective lenses. So I want to start with B, because B is going to have to leave us before the hour is over. So I think I want to start here with you, B. So can you maybe talk about, let's start here. So Dan Patrick, Lieutenant Governor, put out like his top 25 priorities, right? And it's a series of bills. And I think the main one, Senate one, dealing with the state's budget. But can you just talk about more broadly around what we can expect out of this Texas legislative session, and what people need to be aware of?
Sure. So the legislative session has just gotten going. So there's the way it works is, as soon as the election is over, so the election happened in the fall, and bill filing starts. So legislators can pre-file bills before the session even starts. Then January 14th was the first day of the legislative session. And by January 14th, there were already way more than 1,000 bills that have been filed. And most legislators, what they're saying is things like, well, I haven't even really filed my important bills yet. So one thing we know is there's gonna be a lot of legislation filed. That doesn't mean it's gonna pass. Most of it won't even get a hearing, but it does just sort of turn up the volume, I guess, on the way that, Danielle, the way that you were saying a minute ago, like people need to kind of simmer down because everything's not happening quite the way it seems like it is in the media. Like that same phenomenon will happen in Texas too, legislatively, that there's all this legislation that gets filed and most of it is not gonna pass and become law or even be a serious threat. However, having said that, there are some really significant, Texas Impact would characterize them as threats and opportunities that the state is facing. And we're generally kind of treating them, I guess, as threats legislatively right now. There's not as much legislation to support as there is legislation to oppose at this point, or serious legislation we think really is going to move. One of the big issues is public education. That's always, when you talk about Senate Bill 1 and House Bill 1, the state budget is the only legislation that the legislature is required to pass. We have to have a budget every 2 years. The biggest item in that budget is public education. It's something that impacts every community in the state, impacts every kind of property taxpayer. And the reason that we have public education is because in the Constitution, it says it impacts our democracy. What the Constitution in Texas says is the reason we have a public school system more than anything else is not STEM, it's not fine arts magnet, it's not learning to be an entrepreneur or learning a trade or any of those things. It's learning to be a participant in democracy. And what the framers of the Texas Constitution and the framers of the US Constitution agreed was that the public, the voting public, have to understand what's going on and be able to, read and understand math and understand history and all those things enough so that they can help make the decisions that impact the life of the whole community. The other two things real quickly that Texas Impact will be probably spending the most attention on, at least in the very near term. One is immigration. It is primarily a federal issue, but the state, of course, has tried really hard to get into the immigration business every way it can, usually to the detriment of local communities and migrants. And the other is broadly, I would say, health. Texas has been the most uninsured, is the worst on maternal health, the worst on children's health. We so often find ourselves in last place in the way that we care for the health of the population. And, the Roman philosophers, in addition to education, the famous quote is health is the first wealth. If we don't have health at the population level and the individual level, we're not going to be able to have democracy any more than if everybody can't read. So those three issues, that's the biggest stuff going on. I'm sure the people who are listening know we've got a crazy contentious situation happening. The Senate and the House, the parties appear not to be able to get things done. But I would say the people who can really interrupt that destructive dynamic are constituents. And I assume that's what you want to talk about, is how people can get engaged.
Yeah. And so I just returned from Austin yesterday. I was down there with a group, with my sorority. It was our day at the Capitol. And one of the things I can say for me, right, just stepping in that building, and we went into the House side and the Senate side, and particularly in the Senate side, you could cut that. It's the tension in the room. It's real. Even down to what I would characterize is a level of disrespect, how some of the legislators, some walked out, and some literally just pretended like we were invisible when we were being recognized. And that was with intentionality, because they knew who we were and to whom it's connected to who we are. because other groups were recognized and there was no exit out of the room. They stood, they acknowledged, they clapped, right? And so, and I just appreciate the ways in which Senator West kind of brought that around, and how he really talked to each and every senator to say, the people in this gallery are educated people, they're experts. So when you have all these committee hearings and you're doing it, talk about the difference between invited testimony and public testimony, right? And saying that invited testimony means you're an expert in this subject matter. Like, call on these people. These are Texans, right? They pay like, these people are your constituents. So I think Senator West did a good, because I don't know if he noticed it or he just knows what he's up against as, a senator in this session. And I think that's what's important too, right? Like, this is why we must be present in Austin. This is why we have to show up. This is where we have to do whatever we can to support those who are trying to do what they can, to push legislation forward, or at least be able to show that there are other voices, right? That what's being put in front of us is not the only option. This is not the only way. This is not the only ideology, right, that is out there. But if we're not there, the echo chamber gets louder for another side who will keep us last in health care, for how we treat others, how we treat the neighbor. We call them migrants, right? But our neighbors, right? So I think, yesterday, just walking and talking to people too, right? It was also talking to some of the reps and just seeing their interaction. And I've never seen some of the reps, the way that they're approaching this, their countenance was even different than times before. They really are like, this is bad, right? That's kind of the energy I was getting from various people, right? Not just our reps that represent us here in my district, but just talking to various representatives. And so I think that's so important, right? So I know you have to leave soon. So, Angela, did you want to jump in on this before we ask B another question?
Well, thank you. And I agree. It is so important for us to be present in these spaces and to present the ideology. I think it's important even just for our representatives to see us there, so that they know that they have our support, as they are there in the midst, in the heat of the battle that is going on the floor. You mentioned that the atmosphere is very different now. We saw even some of that starting in the last legislative session. Would go there and there would be a little bit of jovialness, sometimes, but now it's a much more serious situation. Understanding the real consequences of all that's at stake. And I just want to, chime in on what V said. There are so many policies that are out there that have been put forth already. And again, it's going to be important for us to understand how these bills, some of them may seem very, again, like, very innocuous, like they should benefit us, but there is an undercurrent around the effects of those bills. For instance, if we're looking at the home exemption laws, again, all of that is going to the defunding of our public education system. So we really have to kind of understand how these things are tied together. It's important for us to help our constituents realize the full ramifications of the legislation that's put forth, so that when we go in and we are trying to hold our legislators accountable for the health and well-being of our communities, we really understand the legislative impact, as well as just understanding this bill is being put forth. Because some things sound like, oh, well, that shouldn't be such a what's the issue with this? Why is this something that we should be concerned about? But one of the things that I'm really working toward within the groups that I work with is increasing that understanding about how these things tie together and their long-term implications.
Yes, for sure. So now, go ahead, B.
Well, I was just going to say, so Angela is making such a good point, and I really want to get this out. The frustration that people have a lot about the legislative process and certainly about Congress too, but they feel like I don't have time to understand all this. It's so complicated, and I have a full-time job, I've got kids, or I've got, responsibilities, and I don't understand how most of the stuff works anyways, and I don't care that much, right? As long as I can go to HEB and buy what I need, like that should be enough for me. And on the one hand, it's not fair to expect everyone to understand everything about how government works. On the other hand, that is kind of the way our democracy is made, is that everybody's supposed to be able to participate. And we've fought for the entire life of this country to bring more people into the process. And it won't work if the people get brought in and then they can't figure out how it works, so they don't want to play. There's an additional piece that I would add, which is even if you make the case that you don't know what you're talking about, nobody really your voice isn't needed here, any of those things, the person who most benefits from your participation in the process is actually you as a person of faith, because I don't care what scriptural tradition you're in, but certainly in my Presbyterian faith, my understanding is my job assigned by God is to care about my neighbor, to care about what happens in the world around me. And so if I say, well, it's just too hard to care about that stuff, the person who suffers the most is me, and the rest of the world and God will be able to figure it out, but I will have failed. So there's a whole set of reasons that we feel compelled to participate, and yet it's so much work, it's so hard. And that is why you can't do it alone. No one can really understand all the issues. They can't really stay on top of everything. And that's why your church, your sorority, Texas Impact, if you're in Houston, Interfaith Ministries for Greater Houston and organizations like that, the NAACP, the ACLU, all of those organizations, the reason that they're important is not because they know the truth or because they're the ones who are the most well-positioned. It's because it's their job to help you. My job at the Capitol is to say as little as possible and make sure that I'm putting Danielle and Angela out front. Their job is to make sure that when I say, do y'all want to come testify? They say, actually, I've got somebody in my church who would even do better. This is a team sport. It is not a spectator sport. And your job is just to be in the team.
I'm so glad I was going there next. See how that works? Because that's good.
Because we're a team. Because we're a team.
Okay, that's exactly what I was going to say, right? And Cheryl slid me a question, and I was like, you went right into it because I was going to it. So this is all working together, right? Because people can say, well, how do I stay up to date on what's happening? How do I know how it's impacting me? So that is why the role of the church, the role of organizations in your local communities is so important, to get in contact with those organizations and get involved. Because if you get on some of these mailing lists, trust me, you're going to get updates nonstop on what's happening, what's taking place. This bill is up. If this passes, this is what this means. So that's how we stay connected. You have to connect with a network, though, right? To your point, that this all works. It's a collective work. We have to do this together. Because I'll say this from my vantage point, when we look at, quote unquote, the other side, one of the ways in which they've been able to have such dominant power, right? Because they are working as a network. They understand where they're going. Here's where we're going. We know it's dehumanizing. We know it can dismantle people's lives, except we know the impact. But the thing is, it's still the strategy works, whether it's for good or evil, right? And that means we're going this way. This is how we're going. Everybody get on board, right? And we stay on point.
That's right.
And we stay on message. And that's what we have to learn to do more of. And I see you, B. I'm going to let you come in because I know you got to leave in about 5 minutes. So go ahead. I'm going to come back because I know what I'm going to say. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just exactly what you're saying. The they say, this is the way we're going, get on board. I was talking to a person, I have talked to two people who have said, I didn't like most of what President Trump, when he was candidate Trump, I didn't like most of what he was saying, but I got the memo, right? I understood that this is how we were going to do. And I just did and the number of people who said, well, I just don't know about Kamala Harris. There's things I just want to make what we are going to need to do. And it doesn't really matter it's not about party, and it's not even about a specific issue. You have to develop a trusted network of people and then stick with it. Don't be constantly double checking. Do I really trust him? I trust him sometimes, but do I trust him on this? You got to have a community and then spend your effort making that community as robust as possible. But that's where I think you maybe were going.
So part of it is that I do think community is so important, and you have to find what I call your tribe, right? Where you feel comfortable, to your point, you trust them. And for a lot of people, that's your faith community, right? But you got to find that place that you trust, and here it is. You also have to really understand what you want in life. Right. Other than that, you will bounce around from this, and now you have all these various ideologies in your mind, right? And so you're kind of traveling down these various roads. So I think first, that's why I think it's important for us to, as a collective, to say, hey, time out. Here's what's happening, and give facts. Right. I believe you got to give empirical data and facts and say, this is where we are. Now, do you agree that this is messed up? Right. Well, good. So we're proposing, these are some of the strategies we're saying we can do to deal with that. Now, are you on board? Yep. Right. And I think that's so most important. We have to know, and not always look to a candidate telling us what it means to flourish, not for a candidate to tell us what it means to have vision. We need to have it for ourselves first. And then you can say, now that candidate, that and you know what? And for some people, it could be, this idea of white domination. That's some people's vision for flourishing.
Right.
For others, it is opposite. So it's about, and that's why I'm saying about the importance of knowing where you stand. And I think that, and I'll keep saying for the others, I think they're clear about where they stand and where they're going, and they move in that direction. I'm just saying, so we have to do the same thing, but I see you. But we just have to, because you have I have 12:27, 3 minutes. So you have 3 minutes. So I'm saying, to your point, B, that yes, that's what's most critical and important. But it starts right, as they say, the first revolution is internal. So you first have to know what you want and where you're going. Then you can find, I connect with that group. Let me jump in with that group, right? And not knowing everything is rosy and perfect. So you don't always leave it the first sign of trouble either, right? It's just you fundamentally trust them, and knowing that, hey, maybe we got a little tension here, but I'm going to stick with this group because overall, this is what I believe in. This is where my morals, my values, etc. The fundamental things that matter most to me are solid. But go ahead, B, you have 2 minutes.
Well, let me just say real quickly that the one other thing that goes in that same neighborhood of all the things that we've been talking about is, you don't have to impact the legislature to impact policy. You don't have to go to Austin to impact what happens in Austin. And in fact, it might be that the best place for you to be is not in Austin, is in your local community, talking to other people in the local community who also need to hear that information, who are at some point in the process going to be the person who does influence the legislator who's going to be making the decision. So you want to see yourself not as, this is how I always say it, and this is the last thing I'll say. Everyone wants to feel like they are the drop of water that makes the glass full. And that their particular participation is the deciding factor. Their vote's the one that was the deciding factor. That is true for every single person. Every drop in the glass is the drop that makes it full, right? The fact that you're a drop that is, I don't know, in the bottom third of it doesn't make your participation any less or more important than anybody else's. So don't think of it as, well, it only matters if I go to Austin. It only
Mhm.
matters if they vote the way I wanted them to. It only matters if I get to talk to the legislator. If you talk to your next door neighbor and they talk to their pastor and their pastor goes to a breakfast and talks to a city council person who talks to the legislator, is just as important as it go. I'm so sorry. I
That's
love
fine.
y'all. You
Thank
know
you,
that.
V.
And I
Okay.
will talk to you again soon.
Okay, bye. So we're good. So B had to leave. So we're gonna pull Angela in, and then Cheryl's gonna become part of our third. She'll be our third. She's not a guest, but she'll be our third because Cheryl is just as capable of having this conversation as anybody else. So I want to pick up where B left off, and so Cheryl, you don't have to ask the question. We can, or you can just pose it, and we all can kind of respond to it. So this is where now, Angela, do you have anything you wanted to say before I move to Cheryl? She had a good question. I think we can talk about collectively.
As B was, as you guys were talking about this idea of making sure that you have a community that you're connected to. And I think this is part of, again, why you and I and Texas Impact, while we're working together, because we do really try to focus on those issues that where we can find commonality with our faith and how our faith dictates and drives us to treat others, to be concerned for others, and in the ways that we believe will truly bring into fruition a greater well-being for everyone. We try. I know you and I. We've talked about this to a great extent. We have concern not just for me and mine, but for ours
Right.
collectively, because there is an underlying belief that when the least of us do well, the whole boat is lifted. Everyone begins to do better in the house. So, and that is one of the things that we're working toward, is how do we put into place those policies and procedures that um, allow all to prosper, allow all to experience safety, allow all to pursue their dreams and visions, and living out their full dignity and humanity.
Yeah, Cheryl, did you want to? Thank you, Angela, because that's just, and it may kind of go into what Cheryl wants to toss around this question. You want to just talk about that?
Yeah, so as you were talking about the importance of finding your tribe, the question came to mind: how do we find our tribe when we're trying to balance within that tribe, building trust and getting involved? How do you find your tribe when you're trying to balance the onslaught of information that you receive, either via social media, printed news, TV news, talking to folks? Like, how can we sort through the various layers of stuff and actually begin to focus on what is factual, and what will be impactful? And then I would know that this is the tribe, this is the place that I want to be. And I know part of that is going to be like knowing what you want, but sometimes people have a hard time even figuring out what that means for them, because I believe now we are conditioned not to think for ourselves, but to be told who we are and how we should act, and who we should be around and who we should not be around. So kind of how do we find our way to our tribe, to the truth, what is meaningful?
I don't know exactly how to say that, but I do think that that's why it's so important for those within the church to develop to help those within our congregations with that, to navigate that. There is a lot of information, and it is hard for individuals to disseminate and sift through and understand what to listen for, who to listen to. And so I believe our role in the faith community becomes exponentially important during this time. For me, with our social justice ministry, one of the things that we really work on, and I keep saying this again, is how is this aligning with our understanding of what we're being led and taught in the scriptures? So if there's a scripture that's saying be kind to the foreigner because remember you were once a foreigner, then that means that as I begin to live as an individual, not only am I being kind to someone who is other than me, I'm also must think about what are the policies, what are in my communities that impact other, that are they compassionate, are they fair, all of those things. So it's always kind of going back to that piece as your litmus test for how you move forward. But in our faith communities, we've always played this role of really helping guide our communities, helping people to understand how your faith life and your daily practical living come together. And that is really part of this work that we're doing, is making sure that these two things align together as we're moving forward.
Yeah, and I think another part of it is, as I heard Cheryl say, sometimes people don't know what they want. So part of it is all this onslaught, you got to step away. It's going to be hard to know what you want and what, because this is what I believe, regardless of your faith, even if you claim not to have a faith, we're all still wired, right, for a sense of belonging. And I believe we're all still wired to want what's best for myself, right? Now, however you articulate that, the language that you use may be different. And so sometimes, let's particularly talk about faith communities and I guess people that we work with. The onslaught of information that's what it's designed to do. It's to keep so much noise in your head that you never can sift through and get to what you really need to get to in terms of understanding what you want. So some of that has to be turn social media off. Right. Some of that is where you get to a place where you can sit to be still, where you can understand what you really want. So your head is clear. But when you're cluttered with all of it, it's all kind, and even myself, right? I consider myself to be a read person. I read, I study, I watch, the news, I watch alternative news sources, and I get lost in scrolling.
Yes.
Right.
And so I even have to say, okay, I can't do any more social media for the next 3 days because I can tell when I'm not thinking clearer. And because I'm having all this stuff in my mind. Oh, I saw this on TikTok, or I saw this on Instagram. Oh, and a lot of times, it's stuff that really does not help me, right? It's pure entertainment.
Right.
Right.
And so much of us are, we're in a soundbite culture.
Right.
So even the information that's in those spaces is not an in-depth analysis of an issue. It's just a little bit of, a salacious title or something to hook our attention for the 20 seconds to give you kind of that just nugget you're going to walk away with. So again, I think it becomes almost incumbent upon, just even as B was saying, those organizations that traditionally have uplifted the concerns and the issues of our communities that we've trusted in. I think that those still remain good sources when you're wanting to tease out and learn more about an issue. I think those are good places for us to kind of start with doing research and understanding, and figuring out how to dive deeper. But I do believe that our faith communities can also be those places as well to help lift the voices that are going to try to have the best interest of our communities.
Yes, so I think that's very important, right? And I think, circling to what you said and circling back to what Cheryl was, the question that she posed that we wanted to, give some response to. We don't have, somebody else may see it a different way, right? It's another way to view that. But I think finding your tribe is easier when you turn off the noise, when you're not relying on sound bites, because then you'll know what you really want. Then you can go look for that, right? Then you can go find. Right. I may decide, you know what, I really want to work with children. Oh, well, there's a local church down the street. I know they have a children's ministry. Let me go see or whatever, whatever, or maybe
right.
You want to go to United Way and see what work they do around child poverty.
Yes.
Whatever the case might be, but you first have to turn off all of this noise.
Yes.
So you can kind of get centered enough to know what it is that you feel drawn to. It's almost this idea. I love the way Dr. Haynes said this sometimes. What would you do every single day if you did not get paid to do it? Right? But you can't know that if you got so many, because you may be thinking, oh, I want to go do this. Because see, what happens is we know, and I'm not this is not my area of expertise, but I know it's from my own personal experience. When you put so much in your mind, right, it's subconscious now, right? So now you probably out here going after this over here. You feel this is what you want in life. That may not be what you really want in life, but all you have is what you've been consuming, right? And so you're going after something that's never meant for you. But because of all that you've taken in, it's never been you spending time with yourself. It's been spending time with other people's, thoughts, other people's ways of viewing, other people's way of living their life. You're going after something that's not meant for you to go after.
And Danielle, I mean, you bring up a powerful point, the taking the time to listen and be centered, and taking that time to spend in meditation and prayer. So that we have an example in the scripture that says that Jesus often withdrew from the crowd.
That's it.
He had to shut out that noise. Right. And that's the Son of God. So if that was his habit, I think it's also just as important for us today to like you said, to step away and listen for the direction of the Holy Spirit to guide us, but to begin to really understand who we are and the things that, because we all have gifts, talents, passions, and tapping into our own superpower that we've been given in that unique mix of how we've been created, and using those gifts, like I said, as we're moving forward, not just for our progress though. I believe we're always blessed to be a blessing. So it's not just about how as individuals you can be blessed, but how, again, the community, I believe for us, especially as African Americans, it is truly part of our culture to have a collective mindset. That's what we came here from, at least that's what I should say.
Right.
We traditionally had a collective mindset, not an individualistic mindset. And I think as we continue in these next few years, it is going to be absolutely imperative that we draw on that. You talk about a Senko for a moment. It is really time that we draw on the collective power, that because that's always what pulls us through in times of oppression.
I mean, period. Right. So now, because I think so let's kind of talk about from what you just said. Again, I'm gonna go back to, and I know that because of where we sit, our privileges in life has afforded us how we view reactions from people are going to be different from other people, right? So we know when we are being invisibilized.
Yes.
Right. We know when there's an intentionality to make you feel like you don't belong here, right? Because when I tell you, and I think that's why, and I know people saying, and we don't just have to go to Austin. That is true. Like, I think all politics are local, right? But I think the day and time we're in, we have to think global and act local. Like, we can no longer just be local. We have to think about the impacts at every level of the government, right? That's so important. And I think being down there yesterday, I'm saying the spirit in that place is different. And I think we have to be everywhere. And for those who can get to Austin, I think it's important to be in Austin when we go down in March. But it's also just important, if you can't go for testimony, you can always provide a written testimony. I think we have to make sure we do not allow this onslaught or this strategy of overwhelming people where we just sit back and decide that we're just paralyzed at this point, where there's nothing we can do. Let me just do what I can to maintain what I have, because that's not the case. And it's to B's point, it's the same thing at the federal level. President Trump is doing all these executive orders. He's making half that stuff can't even happen, right? Legally. And we know legally doesn't mean much for him. But I'm saying, right, and same thing with Texas, right? All this stuff is being thrown at people like, oh my goodness, I guess we just don't know what to do. Let me just go to work. Let me just make sure I take care of my kids, make sure we're good. But we have to not fight back, because that's what they want, right? So we have to continue to not just resist what's happening that we feel that's really death dealing to our communities in particular, because we know that if America gets a cold, Black folks going to have pneumonia, right? Exactly. So, and that's why, I know we laugh about it. We post things like, F around and found out, right? Mm-hmm. We'll say that, or we'll say, and I think about that image of Black women sitting on a building where they're showing like everything burning up. I said, that looks good, but that bill's going to be burned up eventually because the
Yes.
fire is going to, you understand what I'm saying? So
Right.
I understand the sentiment behind all of it. And we also know the FAFO is real. And we're like, they finding out. But the problem is we going to find out too. And we find out before everybody else finds out.
Yes.
Right? So it's this idea of, and that's why I say somewhere in here, and that includes, right, how we are engaged at every level of government. That's why it's not just enough to respond to a Project 2025 or always be reactive, but we all just think about what does it mean for us to flourish regardless of 2025, Project 2025. What does it mean for us to flourish regardless of what's happening in Austin? So we have to resist because you can't allow, right, because policies and laws are real. Like policies dictate how resources are distributed, who's deserving and entitled of those resources, and laws kind of what govern our behavior, right? Govern how we can. So that's it. We have to do that too. But I'm saying, in addition to that, we need to also understand what does it mean, to your point, going back to the collective. What does it mean for the collective to say, oh, we can build this alternative way of living and being while we are still, trying to dismantle and disrupt systems and institutions that are undergirded by white domination, right? At their core. And that's regardless of who sits in those seats of power. Because they can be Black, Latino, Asian. They're part of this culture, right? They're part of a systemic issue. Or the problem is systemic, right? And we know it's also systematic. So we know there's a way in which that system churns regardless of who's in the seat, right? And so I think we have to really, for me at least, I'm really, really leaning more into what does it mean for us to take our power, the various forms of power that we have access to, because we know we have divine power will link up with us when we engage in the acts, right, that are just, that are liberative, that are equitable, right, that are fueled by God's light and love. We know that. So I think for me, a lot of my energy is around that, while I'm also making sure I have attention on what's happening to really dehumanize, right? It's really about dehumanizing folks and really only lifting up those that fit a particular criteria. Mainly is white male, not even white gay male, right? What they're going after, it's like this white male patriarchy that has to be very dominating over everybody. Including white women. Now, they don't see that for themselves, but that's what that means. That's what it is, right? And it is part of that, what I'm calling the marketing tactic to make the other non-whites look at the Black folks like, well, we not them, so we're going to be over here because let them catch the brunt of what's, and now they're finding out, oh, us too, yeah, you too, right? It's the same thing with the affirmative action case at the Supreme Court, right? So they used the Asian students to file the lawsuit against Black students at Harvard in terms of the affirmative action and admissions. That got struck down. Now the Asian students are suing because now their numbers went down because and I keep saying these executive orders, these type of attacks on affirmative action, DEI, et cetera, it's never about that. It is about preserving whiteness at all costs.
Yes.
And a lot of other non-white groups are complicit because it's this idea of we not Black Americans. Because you have, some, not all, obviously not all, but you have some, Latinos, Latinx folks. You have other non-white people who we not Black American, even Jamaican. And I can give a real example of something that happened just this week with a Black American co-worker and her co-worker who was Jamaican, of what happened with them with this federal mandate, where some were given emails saying, take this severance package and resign, right? And risk losing your pension because you give it up because you take a severance. Yes. And how one of them got the notice and the other one didn't. Right. And so I'm just saying that because in their mind, the targeting they're doing around the immigrants or the migrants they want to deport from this country. And also when it comes to the whole migrant population and immigrant communities, and I can't remember who put this out. I think it was Wendell Pierce, the actor Wendell Pierce, who is also very much socially active. Right, he's very much an activist too, and he said, "I don't see anybody, rating the Irish immigrant communities looking for undocumented people, or
the Russian,
the Russian, like
communities.
all the white leaning migrant immigrant communities. Nobody's talking about going in there, and they have undocumented workers too.
Yes.
So that's what. So to B's point, going back into it behooves us then to be collective in this response to this onslaught. That's the goal, is for us to do the infighting, for all the non-whites to infight and try to be a social hierarchy, right? How can I make sure I'm above you? Because I don't want to be down here because I know what that gets me. And we're getting it anyway because they're not parsing that out. They're not parsing out you're Dominican, you're Latino from Brazil or wherever, right? Like that's not what's happening. And we need to understand what's really going on while saying, okay, so what do we do to make sure that we're perfectly fine regardless of what's happening? Because I think, I'm always a believer we have everything we need in our communities. We have everything we need in most of our churches. We have mostly everything we need in our churches to thrive. And to your point, if we're doing Sankofa, we can call the roll on the ways that Black folks have lived in much more oppressive ways and have built whole towns. Forget Black Wall Street and Tulsa as a community in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Whole towns we did this, right? With much less.
I mean, that was part of the story even here in Houston. There were areas of Houston that became kind of their business sector for African Americans that eventually was systematically taken over, and they were pushed aside out of those areas. But continuously, I think, like you're saying, collectively, we've been able to do it before, and we can do it again. And it's to our benefit when we learn how to, I think in the past, the idea of circulating the Black dollar within the Black community has been, as of late, I think that idea has just been, something, I don't know, just as just some table talk for us. But I think at this point in time, we are going to understand that this is a serious conversation that links to the viability of our community.
Right.
For all of us, right? For all of us within our community.
Without question. So I think that's why, and so a start could be how we might be able to come. Here's a way you can find your tribe immediately, right? You can join us in Austin. You'll be around so many different people. You'll be around different people from Friendship West, and believe it or not, we are not all the same, right? People have different passions, and that's what when we have our whole collective legislative priorities from Wheeler, from Friendship West, from Texas Impact, we're representing even various constituents within our own congregation. Right, so there will be a number of priorities. So coming to Austin also not just interact with elected officials, it also affords you the opportunity to network with people. So you can probably say, what do you do? Oh, I need to call you. I want to be engaged in, dismantling this carceral state that we have. Right, I want to be involved in it. How can I get involved? So it's also about networking and you see people. So you see, one, you're not alone. If you do this work somewhere and you feel you're in isolation, coming into a group of people, you say, oh, I'm not by myself. So now it looks better to have more people with you than you're just out here by yourself, where you can be picked off, where you can be targeted, right? Yes. So now you join more people. It's like, oh, it's like a whole other group of people who do this work. Let me connect with them. And it helps us to build our capacity, share our resources. But it's also an opportunity to not just find your tribe, not just talk to legislators, but it's also a place I feel where we can collectively see it as a place of centering our power, but also saying, how do we now pull all this power together? And it could be a space for organizing, for us thinking collectively. So it's not just a person or a group or a organization saying, this is how we're going to do it. Because here's the reality. Institutional power and collective power is the only way you can beat what's happening with system institutions that are not designed for us to flourish. I'll say it that way. We cannot do that alone and as individuals. Because individuals never beat these systems and institutions that are looking to strip us of not just our human rights, but, our voting rights, human rights, really what it means to be human. And that's the point, to make you feel like you're less than human and to treat you that way by passing policies and laws that impact you in a very negative way. So now you don't think that can, for some people, that can make them feel they're not worthy. So now I'm just going to shrink and take what happens to me. And we're saying,
Well,
when you're
Danielle,
around, yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I mean, that's really the story of you and I coming together into this space,
Right, right,
running into each other, bumping into each other in Austin, and having conversation. Oh, these are the issues you're looking at. Oh, well, these are some of the ones that we've been thinking through. And oh, no, we hadn't really stepped into that arena yet. And just like you said, building greater capacity, figuring out the ways that we can support each other. There's sometimes, Danielle and I have been at the same table together, offering testimony, and just, again, understanding I'm learning from her, what they're doing there at Friendship, and I'm sharing with her what we're doing here at Wheeler, and going, oh, those are good ideas that we can begin to implement at our various places where you may have an opportunity to offer some level of influence about what's going on. So yeah, I strongly believe that we really do have to get into that collective mindset and start leveraging the work that we're all doing and using the strength of that voice, bringing all of those voices together.
For sure. So so we got like 4 minutes left. So what I want to spend this time doing between the two of us, I want to talk about what's next, right? And we want to talk about how we're going to have Family Matters Faith Days at the Capitol, March 16th, 17th, and 18th. And that is designed for us to really, you really can't go to Austin just one time to be impactful. You really have to, if you can, be there as much as possible. So we really are, I know it's a stretch to ask folks to be there 3 days, even 1 day, 2 days. So, but we are asking if you're able. It's so important to be there more than 1 day if you can, to really absorb what is happening, to get the training, to be exposed. So then you go back to your respective local municipalities and kind of know how that impacts you at the city level, what's happening at the state level. And then to B's point, because that's also how we were able to get some bills passed. Now, I'm kind of parenthetically saying this, how we were able to move around payday lending in the state of Texas. We never could get anything passed at the state level. So we're going into Austin. Then we found one of our, no longer a city council rep now, but back then it was a city council rep who was sensitive to that. So we started talking to him, right? So he was going to Austin testifying, and then eventually we came back to Dallas, and we passed local ordinances that protected people from payday lenders. And from that, I don't know what it's up to now. The last time I checked, 32 other cities in the state passed similar ordinances, right? So sometimes it's different ways that you can get to your goal. Now, obviously, we still need statewide because it really needs to cover all 254 counties and not just, the handful. But so that was just parenthetically to say, to your point, the coming together, what it means to be in Austin, and that it allows you to strategize and organize, because you may decide, well, let's go, where are you from? You're from Houston, I'm from Houston. Let's go back to Houston and deal with it on this level, because we probably won't get anything out of this session. But it's still important to make sure your voice is there, that you showed up to say, we don't like what's happening. I don't like what's happening to me nor my community. So I'm going to at least be on record saying, you may pass all this, but know that there was resistance. Know that some people really push back against this, because we find it to be death dealing to our communities. And so that's the resistance. And then when you build, okay, they won't do that, the liberation comes in. We say, well, we're going to build our own. We'll do something else to make sure that we survive this moment that's sustainable, that can be institutionalized. Because that's the other thing. Right. We can't do a lot of things where it's just an event and that's it. Because then the institutional memory is not there. Then you just repeat it again. Then somebody else comes in and starts from scratch. We're never getting ahead, right? We're always just recycling. Yeah. So I think that's what's important. There. And that can only happen in community. And so we're going to invite you. Brooke, do you have it on the screen? Yes, thank you. So Family Matters, if you're you should be able to scan the QR code. I have to make sure we have this on our website. It should be. If it's not, it will be. So if you're on your phone, you won't be able to scan the QR code, but please register. And you can decide, if you want to come down on Sunday, that's fine, and go back home. But really, you want to be there Monday and Tuesday, because both days will be very critical to understanding who we are, what we're attempting to do, because it won't just stop on the 18th. If you register, we're going to stay in contact with you in other ways you can be engaged beyond Austin. So we'll know if you're from Houston. Angela can have that information, how to keep you engaged in what they're doing at Wheeler. If you're in the North Texas area, at Friendship West, same thing. And same thing with Texas Impact. So that's going to get us started. We're asking you to come down, join us. We have a Family Matters legislative priority events, because how we see Family Matters means all children have access to lunch, to breakfast, to health care. Like, it's so much we believe what family
education
and education, major education, right? How we're trying to now
Education.
shift this money to private schools. Who determines what, who gets in and who does not get in?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
again, we have to see the game is being played, right? And we have to
Right,
be prepared.
right.
So we can only do that when we come together. And so for the purpose of the state of Texas, Austin is that seat of power.
Yeah.
Right. So we want to
Yes,
go to that seat
yes.
of power and stand firm, as we like to say, stand 10 toes down on what we
Right,
believe in,
right.
how we understand
know,
family.
You know, Danielle, you talk about how these things are so connected, because right here in Houston, we're continuing to fight for our
Right.
school system,
That's right.
which has been commandeered by the state.
Right.
You
That's
know?
right.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's
And
right.
taken
Exactly.
completely out of the
Exactly.
control of local, you know, the local vote and what the local folks here want for our school system. So what's happening in Austin is very important to what's going on here in Houston for us. So
Yes.
I fully any of these areas, when you start to think about, like you said, education, healthcare, access to healthcare, what does it really mean about public safety?
Right.
You know, for our
Right.
communities. I was talking to one of the sheriffs here, and he was talking about, you know, a bill to prevent children 12 and under from being handcuffed, because we know that is a scarring event for a child to have that type of interaction with law enforcement. So there are all kinds of things that are out there that we, you know, that again, as we come together as a collective, nobody really, you know, again, we all have jobs, just like you were saying,
Right.
we have jobs, we have lives. But it's as we come together that the information is lifted for us, and then we can bring about an awareness that helps us to really begin to help you and others who are listening, as you said, Cheryl, know how to find your tribe, know how to figure out what's important to me, what are the things that I would value, and you know, that I believe need to lend my voice to.
Yes. And so the last thing I'm going to say, because this hour always goes fast because we're out of time.
Wow, already? Wow.
Yeah, but to your point, I want to say this is the critical need that we have. To your point, we have to have a 100-year vision and then a strategy how to get there, so that we
Yes.
don't fall so easily when things are passed. That detriment like, how do we foolproof our communities as much as we can, so when things happen, we don't have to scramble, or we're not looking at what we must do to survive. We're like, okay, we're already moving down the track. We see this coming, this came. We can address it, but we don't have to suffer in the meantime. At least suffer to the point where we're now like, what do we do? Now food is cut off, right? I mean, the Black Panther Party started the breakfast program. Why? Because the kids didn't have food to eat. Then now the United States government took that model, right, which is where you got your free breakfast from, right? The free food program
Right.
with the federal government. So what I'm saying is we've been here, and we know how to build on our own. And so the question becomes, once we put things in place, how do we make sure they are sustainable?
Right. That's a great question.
And so that's
I
what we have
think
to work through.
it's not an easy answer. And one
Mhm.
of the, you know, that's the other piece of this, is understanding that as much as we are a fast-paced society, these are complex
That's right.
issues.
That's right.
And so we need people coming to the table with creativity, but also some longevity,
Right. Right.
and being committed to working through the issues. You know, we need all of that as we think about that 100-year vision of where we're trying to go.
I'm gonna go period there, and like I always tell everybody that comes on, we got to come back and because this is the conversation I think we really have to extend and we really have to have, because then we, in 2026, right, we're already talking about 2027 legislative session. You understand what I'm saying? It's like we got to get into the mode of working well in advance, right? So to your point, we have to have more conversation around what does it mean how to build our institutions, support them, and to make sure they're sustainable and ran with integrity, right? That's going to be important. So thank you. Let's thank. Well, B is gone. We can still thank B. And we want to thank my good friend, the Reverend Dr. Angela Ravin-Anderson, who is a very brilliant and beautiful woman that I respect highly. And I look forward to seeing you in Houston in the next, really like under a month or so. It's going to come fast. And so we'll be glad to do that. So please make sure you sign up to be with us in Austin. Very important to have our voices there and moreover our faces. They need to see us down at the Capitol taking a stand against what is happening to us and to our community. So important. So please consider joining us in Austin. And of course, you can also support Fannie Lou's Classroom by always purchasing one of our Fannie Lou Classroom t-shirts. If you're on your phone, you can go to friendshipwest.org/justice, and you will see a link where you can purchase your shirt. If you're watching on another device, scan the QR code and you can order your shirt, and we'll get that order out to you as soon as possible. And that allows us to keep this podcast going where we always try to have relevant conversations. And what our hope is to break it down where everybody can understand it, but not to say we have all the answers, but we hope something is said throughout the hour to make you say, let me go research that some more. Or maybe someone finds says, I know what I want to do in life. I know what I want. Let me go find my tribe from here. So this show is always designed just to do that. Let's have conversations, but moreover, may we all learn together, because I believe my philosophy, part of my leadership philosophy is everybody has a brick to bring to the table. We all have something to bring that we can all build this justice movement together. So thank you for being here on today. We look forward to seeing you next week right here at 12 o'clock in Fannie Lou's Classroom.
From the church house.